Good morning, everybody. Now, once again, I have to call for a de-escalation in Ukraine, which doesn't seem to be what's happening. In fact, some of the people in the government in the UK are trying to escalate things, and this is really not helpful to anybody now or in the future when this thing is over and we all have to sit around the table and try to normalise things. So our Foreign Secretary, or I should say the Johnson regime's Foreign Secretary, I don't like to think of her as my Foreign Secretary, but there we go, Liz Truss, has now called for weapons and fighter jets to be given to Ukraine to be used in this conflict, which we can now, I think, categorically understand this is a proxy war between the West and Russia taking place in Ukraine. And both the West and Russia will happily fight each other to the last Ukrainian against each other, which is no good for the poor people of Ukraine who are caught in the middle between the Western idiots in power trying to poke the bear, and then Russia, which is incredibly paranoid, actually fighting back and defending ethnic Russians in Ukraine. So, you know, the situation is just getting out of hand. We also have another British junior minister, James Heappey, suggesting that it's okay for Ukraine to make attacks on Russian infrastructure inside Russia. Which again is an insane escalation of rhetoric. We want to de-escalate the conflict. Now, from the very beginning, it's been quite clear that what's happening at the moment in eastern Ukraine would have happened, even though if you listen to the mainstream media, they wouldn't have told you this. But wouldn't you? What the plan was is for the Russian army to surround the bulk of the Ukrainian army, which was stationed along the edge of the Donbass region, and to demilitarize. So that's essentially their plan is to wipe out the Ukrainian army, which is terrible, a terrible loss of life there. But because they want to stop shelling on the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in the east of Ukraine, where there are ethnic Russians. This could have all been avoided. This would have been the easiest war to avoid if people had just stopped escalating before the conflict broke out. But that didn't happen because the long-term plan of the powers that be in the West that don't represent ordinary people, the World Economic Forum, the Council for Foreign Relations, the military-industrial complex that makes loads of money out of war, wanted to try to bring Ukraine into the EU and into NATO, and of course Russia didn't like that. Russia has a sense of history that we simply don't have anymore in the West because of the parlous and terrible state of our education. Most children in the West are not taught our history very much. It's a terrible thing. But Russians do have a great sense of history, and the way they see the West is as a threat. This may not make sense to most people in the West who can't see back beyond about 5 or 10 years. But the way Russia thinks of the West is as a belligerent and dangerous power. Napoleon marched on Moscow in the early 19th century, and then Hitler marched on Moscow in the 1940s, in the 20th century. So the way Russia views what the West is doing now is just a continuation of what's been happening over the last 200 years. That may not make much sense to people here in the UK and America, but Russia very much sees the West as this kind of attacking power that is a threat. So the bear is quite paranoid about the West making another attack and another march on Moscow. That's just the way they see the world. You know, not good or bad. It just is what is. So of course they're paranoid about any poking of the bear, which was exactly what the West has been doing, particularly for the last 8 years in the Donbass region in Ukraine, and arming real National Socialists. who are there embedded into the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian government. That's just how it is. We need to understand all of these things and then de-escalate to stop the loss of life and to stop the war from spreading outside of Ukraine into Russia, into Transnistria and Moldova, which appears that it is going that way. And if our government ministers start making crazy statements like, we're going to send fighter jets to Ukraine, it's okay to bomb Russia, it's okay to bomb Moldova, and the war is going to last for a long time, this is going to go on for months or years, and Liz Truss, we have to be prepared for the long haul. No, what we should be doing is trying to get this over with and get back to normal. So, I think there's only two people who are party leaders in the UK who are saying this thing. I'm one of them, and the other is George Galloway. Now, I don't agree with a lot of what George Galloway would say on economics, on other things, but on this issue, he's on the right side and he's calling for de-escalation. I only hope that other people will start to realise that continuing this war of attrition is not going to be any good for anybody. It's not going to be good for Russia. It's not going to be good for the West. It's not going to be good for Ukraine. So people have just got to eat some humble pie and get round the table. And for the sake of our future, for our humanity, we need to end this thing and stop the war.